come down, I'm gonna bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gonna be biblical.
Hello, and we are live.
Oh, welcome.
Patriots Across the Pond and Frens, episode 1, with Elisa and our special guest today, Ron Partain. How are you guys? All right?
Doing great. How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Good to have you here, Ron.
Wow, good to be here. This is episode 1. I'm breaking the cherry, so to speak.
You are.
You are.
Wow. I am flattered. I am flattered.
Well,
I didn't know that.
Well, from how I've spoke to you in forecasts and stuff like that, we couldn't have a better guest to start, really. So
Well,
I think we're going to talk about your new book today and just see where it goes, really. Your new book is called The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible. And let me just read the first paragraph of the forward. This book by Ron Partain, The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible, is well written and engaging chronicle that will instantly capture the attention of any thoughtful reader. With clarity and conviction, Ron leads the reader step by step through one of the most misunderstood areas of biblical theology, unraveling traditions that have clouded plain scripture for generations.
Yep. It's, the funny thing is that what really inspired me to do this was my mom was doing a Bible study for she was filling in as a teacher for her women's Bible study class, right? And it was she put together a lesson. It took her like a week and a half to put this lesson together. She had like several books open, and I wasn't really paying that close attention to what she was doing. That's just kind of what she does. And then she came to me. She said, "Hey, can you print this out? I need it." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, fine." She's like, "I've got to do this one, and then I got to do one for next week." I'm like, "Okay." So the funny thing is that I'm pretty big into using like AI, and so what I did was what took her almost 10 days to put together. I put together part 2 together in about 15 minutes. And
yeah.
And as I was helping her kind of go through some of the stuff, it really kind of dawned on me, because I'm actually working on another project. Hey, baby. I'm working on another project, and it's this. As I was talking to her, I'm like, this actually would fit into the other project that I'm working on. And so anyway, I just kind of started writing it out, and the next, one thing led to another. I called a friend who's a pastor, and he was like, "Oh, I shared kind of with him my my concept, and he's the one who wrote that the forward, the first paragraph of the forward that you read. So the book is kind of thick. I have this is my. I mean, I literally just got this probably about 5 days ago. You can see the. I don't know if you can see the strip across there, the silver strip. It says not for resale because it was like it's like a published like a pre what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a pre-production,
like a sample, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, but it looks kind of thick, but it's really not. It's really kind of like two books in one. It's the first book is, or the first part is the actual book, and then the second part is essentially just an enormous amount of research material and appendices. And what I do is I go into, I don't just use the Bible, and I don't use, for the most part, I don't use, I use the ESV translation for the most part. But the vast majority of what I use is either the original Greek or Hebrew, and then translate. So, and then I talk about and the term "the most embarrassing verse in the Bible" is actually accredited to C.S. Lewis. He wrote he wrote a paper. It's escaping me right now what he wrote with the title that he wrote. Hold on, guys.
He's a cat man.
Yes, I breed Bengals, and I have I've I think seven right now. So and that was Winchester. He's probably my oldest. But anyway, they don't have any concept of the camera. So
they don't have a concept of anything. They walk right. I have to keep my cats out. They walk across the keyboard. They lay down. They want to be pet.
Well, I think I shared this with you the last time. Is I have this.
Yeah.
This goes over my keyboard because it allows me to actually type on my keyboard, and a lot of times the cats will they'll actually be on. They'll be laying across that as I'm typing. So, but anyway, so C.S. Lewis actually said that those are his words, and C.S. Lewis is one of the greatest Christian apologists of the 20th century, and he wrote it in 1962, I think. So, the term "the most embarrassing verse in the Bible" isn't me. That's not my language, but I wrote that specifically because I felt like that would be a very eye-catchy title, right?
He was referring to a specific verse, right? I think it's Matthew 24.
Matthew 24:34. Yeah, he was referring to that specific verse, and essentially, in fact, let me pull it up here where he actually said it.
Just quickly, how would you define a Christian apologist? For anyone that doesn't know,
a Christian apologist is somebody who, an apologist is somebody who defends something. So he was a defender of Christianity.
Right. Yeah.
So it's actually up in my forward here. Let's see.
And is this even though that was what you used for your title, is Matthew 24:34 actually what you refer? Do you refer to that, or you just use?
I refer to it. I refer to it many times. Yeah.
Okay.
So
can you tell everyone what that verse is?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me read. Let me just read my the introduction. How's that? I think that would be that'd be a good place to kind of give people an idea, because that's really kind of what it is.
And if I could interject, Ron, when we were off camera, you actually gave a really
I gave an author's note. Yeah, I'd be happy to read that. I'd be happy to read that, and it'll make a lot more sense. Let me do this here. C.S. Lewis is remembered as one of Christianity's greatest modern defenders, the author of Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Chronicles of Narnia. His gift was clarity, stripping away complexity and showing faith as both rational and imaginative. And yet Lewis had a confession. In his essay, The World's Last Night from 1960, he admitted that one verse of scripture troubled him deeply. He called it the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. And that verse is, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." Matthew 24:34, and that's the English Standard Version. Lewis's embarrassment was not unique. Generations of pastors, scholars, and ordinary believers have stumbled at the same verse. Many have passed over it quietly or quickly, offered strained explanations, or avoided it altogether. Yet the issue lies not with the words of Christ, but with the crooked trail of interpretation that was handed down long after his disciples were gone. Lewis did not brush it aside. He admitted the plain reading seemed to mean Jesus was promising that his return at the end of the age would happen within his lifetime of his first disciples. And plainly, Lewis said that had not happened, at least not the way Christians had been taught to expect it. His words were disarming. Say what you like, the apocalyptic beliefs of the first Christians have been proved to be false. It is clear from the New Testament that they all expected the second coming in their own lifetime. For Lewis, this was a thorn in his side that he could not reconcile. Poet Sam Walter Foss captured the main problem in 1865 with his piece, The Calf Path. He described how a wandering calf cut a crooked trail through the woods. Over time, men followed it, but built it into a road, then into a city street, then a highway. Foss concluded, men are prone to go blind along the calf path of the mind. This is what happened with Christian eschatology, a meandering path of interpretation blazed centuries later, hardened into tradition. Once enough people walked it, the crooked way looked like the only way. I mean, and how often has that actually happened in our lives, in not just in Christianity, but just in everything?
Yeah.
And here lies the irony. Christians often accuse skeptics of bending scripture, yet in this case, it has been believers who've twisted words like generation, soon, and near, not because the text was unclear, but because the systems that they inherited could not survive a plain reading. Lewis's discomfort did not come from a failure in Christ's words. It came from the weight of centuries of commentary layered upon top of them. By the 20th century, entire denominations had been raised to assume prophecy always referred to the distant future. The embarrassment then is not that Jesus failed. The embarrassment is that Christians did not believe him. Systems were built that forced scripture to bend. Verses were redefined. Timelines were stretched. Tradition became a highway so familiar that few even questioned how crooked it was. My investigation. I'm a Christian who loves history and geopolitics, and my faith drives my commitment to truth. For years, the standard account of dispensationalism's origins troubled me in ways I could not articulate. So I committed to serious investigation, following the evidence wherever it led me. The intersection of these areas revealed patterns I could not ignore, and once the reasons for my unease became clear, I knew that this book needed to be written. I approached this material as a historian, and I present it as I would a case before a jury. I cannot claim that every detail is beyond dispute, but I have worked to gather reliable evidence and cite sources carefully. What follows is my best reconstruction of events and influences based on the documentation we have. I'm not asking you to accept my assertions blindly. I'm asking you to weigh the evidence as a juror would and decide whether the pattern reveals how certain ideas and actors led the church down crooked paths. This book is basically two books. The first two chapters, I'm sorry, I skipped. The architect of this book, the first two chapters will feel denser than the rest. This is because I am attempting to condense 2 centuries of history that deal with powerful and influential men, money, and institutions that they manipulated. This resulted in a huge change of theology and how it was presented and studied by both pastors and their congregations. I feel we have this romantic idea that theology is somehow protected by God here on earth. I know I did, But I came to discover that theology has shifted, and not on its own. Doctrines moved when politics and power pushed them. You will see names, dates, and networks recur across seemingly unrelated fields: banking, publishing, law, academia, seminaries, Bible colleges, and theology. That complexity is not accidental. It is used to camouflage and conceal major doctrinal changes. The case unfolds in two waves, each case building on what came before. Wave one is chapters 1 and 2, the machinery of capture. These first two chapters trace multiple networks. They are about money, power, and theological manipulation. You're going to see how Darby made repeated voyages across the Atlantic, very likely funded by discreet donors. You'll see how Schofield wasn't some lone genius. He had high-powered Wall Street lawyers, bankers, and political backers who made sure Oxford University Press broke its own precedent by printing a Bible with commentary in the margins. They had never done it before, and they have never done it, and they have not done it since. And that was 1909. Then the picture whitens. Marxist infiltration in the 1930s and 40s hijacked the gospel, beginning in seminaries with the social gospel and spreading into universities and law schools, especially the Ivy League, where so many of our politicians and judges were trained. At the same time, the Johnson Amendment put a muzzle on pastors. Not long after, prayer was stripped out of schools. That cascade, the silenced pulpit, and the silent classroom marked the beginning of a moral decay we live with today, the collapse of patriotism, the family, and the church itself. You'll also see how Zionist organizations carefully push the idea of Judeo-Christian identity onto Americans, cultivating loyalty to the modern political state of Israel by deliberately conflating it with the prophetic return of biblical Israel. This is hard to read because it dismantles assumptions most of us grew up with. The documentation exists. Most people just have never looked at it. Wave 2 is chapters 3 through 7, the scriptures. Once you see how the machinery worked, these chapters return to the text itself, and we're going to examine what Jesus, the prophets, and the apostles actually said. We look at the time statements. This generation so near. We trace Greek words that were translated one way in some verses and differently in others, sometimes deliberately to serve a theological agenda. Chapter 4 stands apart because it's Josephus, a Roman historian who personally witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem, and he gives us a historical eyewitness testimony. His account is not theology, but it overlaps with Jesus' warnings in ways that you cannot ignore. Prophecy and history converge here. Then we look at other writers from the same period who confirm his testimony. Chapters 5 through 7 expand the picture with writings from the same period, Jewish apocalypses and early texts. Some of these are not scripture, but they show how people in the first century understood apocalyptic language. Think of them like letters or journals you may find in the attic, written in the same years as the main story. They don't replace scripture, but they do help you hear it in a way that the original audience did. By the end, you will have seen both the systems that capture the church and the scriptures that expose it. And you may never look at your Bible the same way again. So, the book is structured in two parts. The first is the investigation, and it presents the historical capture and scriptural analysis. It's narrative argument, basically the case being laid out step by step. Part 2 is the evidence and reference, or the appendices, where they comprise the latter half. You're going to find ancient texts from the 1st and 2nd centuries that illuminate how apocalyptic language was understood, extended historical documentation, source material on primary texts, detailed scholarly references. The appendices are not optional extras or afterthoughts. They are the evidentiary foundation. The main chapters build the argument. The appendices prove it can stand under scrutiny. If you're skeptical of a claim in the main text, the appendix material exists so you can verify it yourself. Think of the book as a trial. The chapters are the opening argument, and the appendices are the evidence submitted to the court. Both are necessary. One presents the case, the other lets you examine it. It's not a book that you can skim or skip around. Each chapter builds upon the last. Skip nothing, even if a detail seems tangential, because what looks minor at first becomes vital later. The evidence is cumulative and interconnected. My aim is not to preach conclusions, but to present the strongest case I can for how the straight path of Christ's words was overgrown by systems that served other masters. So when we return to Lewis and his haunting verse, the embarrassment is not in Christ's timing, but in the trail Christians followed. To uncover how that path was first blazed, we must look back to 1830 Scotland, where a young girl named Margaret MacDonald claimed to see a vision that would spark one of the most consequential detours in modern Christianity. And that is the introduction. Sorry it seemed so long.
No, well, you certainly done your homework, John.
What's that?
Yeah, no,
You certainly done your homework.
Yeah.
so I want to just
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, this was, I mean, this, I can't lie. I did use AI to help me create this book, but I've passed this around to several people that I know, and everybody that I've shared this with, they've come back to me and they said, "Wow!" I mean, their jaws have like, they have to pick their jaws up because they're like, "My God, I've never seen anybody present a case the way you have that does it." I mean, and if people read this book with an open mind and look at it, it would be very difficult to come to other conclusions. But the thing is that, in Christianity, just like it is in politics or any other system of belief that we hold dear, the vast majority of people, they can't table their emotional attachment to information. And if they can't, go ahead.
No, that is it's so funny you said that, because I made two comments while you were reading, and one of them was, how does this relate, which it does, to a lot of where we are today, our current situation? Because, and I was going to ask you that, people have a hard time detaching from those belief systems that they've learned, they've been indoctrinated with, however you want to say it, the things that they hold dear, and then the belief systems that become part of them. So why do you think that is? I mean, we have
Emotion.
this ongoing debate, right? And
emotion.
It's not only well, it is emotion at its core, but it's deeper than that, because when people become their beliefs, it becomes their identity. And so when you ask someone to have an open mind, right, which many of us in this community do, that's why we go down these rabbit holes. That's why we're open to new ideas and thoughts and questioning things. But when you ask someone to do that, they have to somehow come to it's okay that maybe the identity I've taken on is not the truth.
Let me kind of like take a sidebar, and I want to. Are you familiar with Franklin Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Are you familiar with that book? Okay, have you read it?
Yes. I haven't read the whole thing. I've skimmed through a lot of it.
Okay. So in the opening chapter, or in the opening, I think it's either in chapter 1 or the introduction, he talks about a paradigm shift. He talks about paradigm shift. Yes. Are you familiar with the story that he talks about?
I'm going to tell everyone.
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. So I don't know if it was a real story or if it was a theoretical thing that he came up with, but in any event, you'll understand. So he tells a story of a guy who's on a subway train in New York. I'm thinking it is in a major city, and it's a Sunday morning where people are just, they're sitting there quietly. The train is kind of empty. They're reading their papers as they're, going on their way. And the train stops, and this guy gets on with 3 kids, and he sits down, and he looks like he's in a fog. And the 3 kids are running around, just absolutely causing chaos all along the train, amongst all the people that are sitting down. I mean, they no longer are in a tranquil environment. They're in an environment that they have to dodge these children because they're just out of control. And the one guy, he finally gets to a boiling point where he just can't take it anymore. And he goes up to the guy and he says, "Dude, do you not see what's going on with your kids? I mean, they're causing chaos everywhere." And the guy just, he kind of like, he's like staring off in the, 1,000-yard stare and off into space. And he kind of comes to and he says, oh, yeah, you know what? You're right. You're right. We just came from the hospital where their mother died, and they don't know how to handle it. And I don't either. So, and I get emotional telling that story because it's like, I mean, when that is evidence of a paradigm shift. You immediately go from anger and frustration to empathy.
Yeah.
Instantly. All right.
That's what many people are going through, right? That's the same thing, because people are, you're in one place and that's where your focus is in until somebody kind of points out the reality. You're still caught up in that. And I think that's what's so hard in general with people accepting all that's really been going on. And the church and the Bible have just been such an integral part of what people believe and how people identify. So I would almost say that your book is like, should have, you need to have an open mind. You need to have an open mind so that your emotions can stay a little bit at bay and you can think this with a more objective, kind of logical part of yourself, your intellect, because people are so attached, and it shakes them to the core when they perceive the threat. So with that said, and by the way,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Finish your thought. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say that you mentioned that you used AI, and people give that a negative connotation, but think about it related to it's a way to gather, as to pull together lots of information. And how is that any different than the law libraries where people are sorting through information to build their case, right? It's the same thing. It's just that it's done quicker and faster, and I guess more globally. You could pull it together. So
yes,
kudos.
And the way that I use AI is different. I mean, I don't just go to ChatGPT and ask a question. I literally have on my computer, I probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I'm just throwing out a random number, but I mean, I probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 10 to somewhere between 10 and 15,000 books in PDF form stored on my computer. And what I'll do is I'll upload those, and some are in EPUB, some are in PDF, but they're all in a format that the AI can read. And I can upload a book and AI can read it in a matter of probably can read a 1,000-page book in a matter of about 20 seconds. And I can then interact with that book, ask questions, and it can give me back answers. And I can cite sources and do things in a lightning fast way, in a way that it would have taken me probably, if without AI, it would have taken me probably 3 to 4 years to write this book. With AI, it took me 6 weeks.
Wow. It's a tool, and we should perceive it as a tool because it can really help, to do things like what you're doing and get that message out even quicker, right? Because you had its help.
But you talked about emotional and emotion and information, and I have an open mind. There's a saying that I love, and I heard it quite a while back, and it says condemnation, or it goes, condemnation without investigation is validation of indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
So, and essentially what that means is that, if you're going to criticize or condemn somebody's ideas but yet you're not going to investigate how they came to those conclusions, and you're just going to criticize them, then essentially all you're doing is you're just using your own biases to to stay in a position that you've long held because it's all you've ever been told. Even if what the other person is saying is true, if you refuse to even investigate it, then it just shows that you're emotionally attached to that information, and you can't give it up. And I think, to your point, Alyssa, is it's 100% right. Because people get emotionally attached to information, what happens is they feel like it's a personal attack. And you know what? And here's a perfect example of that is, and I think this is a great example of how it was used on the American people, is when Obama became president. When Obama became president, and they started pushing out, he started pushing out policy that we didn't like. It didn't have anything to do with the policy decisions that were being made by his administration or by Congress and that he was going along with. It had everything to do with we didn't like him because he was black.
That's right. But isn't that what they do with everything? They bring 100%. It to an emotional, so yes, that it goes right to the core. And unless you're the type of person that can say, wait a minute, where's my critical thinking? Let me really analyze this, which we've seen from the movement and everything that's happened over the last 8 years. It's a very difficult place for people to go to put that emotional side, because like you said, it's a personal insult. When you, like, as a coach, right? I learn how to, you want to change behavior, but the only way you can change behavior is to understand the paradigm that's already there. And what happens is people develop into this identity, and it shakes them to the core because it's no longer just an idea or an intellectual thought. It becomes who they are. So, it's a small percentage of people that are able to put that differentiation and say that just because I believe something doesn't make it who I am. So therefore I can open up my mind to listen to new views. But most people, whether it be because that indoctrination is so strong or they don't have enough. It really comes down to not having enough, confidence in self, that they have to rely on.
Yeah. So I think there's multiple dynamics in play there. I think the emotional aspect, almost all information is put out today with an emotional attachment, almost every single thing. And when you put when you attach emotion to information, then, like you said, it becomes a personal attack. So it's extraordinarily difficult for people to detach that. And then, like you said, it kind of goes to their identity. A lot of times what happens is they form their identity based on what they believe. And if you say something that attacks that, and I think people on the right like to think that they're immune from emotional responses. I remember,
not at all.
Oh, I guess it was probably 2016, 17 time frame. I created actually it was even before that. I think it was like in the latter half of the second Obama administration, or second Obama term. I created a politics page on Facebook, and it was I think at one time, I think at its peak, we had probably about 5,000 people on there. And at any given time, there was probably, I don't know, 50 to 100 people that were, commenting fairly regularly. And it was predominantly conservative. I tried so hard to get, to get people from the opposite side to come in and engage in dialogue and debate. And I did have a few that were like, they were stubborn, they were in there and they were, they're kind of like me. I mean, I love being the minority in a chat where I go in there and I'm like, I throw the Molotov cocktail and watch everybody, attack me. And then I'm fighting everybody off. I relish that, that environment, but not a lot of people do. But as the board owner, I had to mediate a lot of time. I had to mediate things between people on the right and people on the left, because I was essentially what I became was a babysitter, and it was very eye opening, because it really helped me to see that the people on the right are no different than the people on the left, from the standpoint of their emotional attachment to information causes them to be blind, and they behave the exact same way as the people on the left. Different in a different way, but in a similar way. There are
because it's a human
parallels.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not
exactly.
a human thing. It's a human thing. It's not a political or an
That's right.
ideology thing. It's a human trait
That's
that
right.
we have, and part of our development as humans. That's how
Mhm.
we form communities, and But tell us more. And Stewie, did you have something to say? Because I feel like
No, I was just going to say, you're talking about, the Obama thing and stuff like that, because you're black and things like that, is the whole, point of this long drawn out woke agenda and the censorship of people's speech is that people became just too afraid to say what they wanted to say,
Yeah.
And,
well, and you know what? That's
of comedians, and comedians in the 80s, everyone was telling jokes, everyone was having a laugh. No one used to get offended, and it was that being offended that was sort of drilled into people that took away people's courageousness of saying what they wanted to say.
That really started in the latter 80s.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where it really started, was in the latter 80s, but it didn't really get a firm grip on people until the mid 90s and into the 2000s, because it was, and that, of course, that's when you really started to see a degradation in education quality. When 2020 happened with the lockdowns, I think that was one of the biggest eye-opening experiences for people with children, because they saw for themselves, with the kids having to be attending school through a Zoom class, they saw for themselves what the teachers were actually teaching. And it was like, they were like, what?
Yeah, and I can attest that personally, because I had kids. They were in high school during that. And I remember one of my sobering moments, I was walking past my daughter's room. She was a sophomore or junior. I think she was a junior in high school, private school, Catholic school, right? All girls. And I'm listening to all these liberal agendas that are coming through. And one of them was when her teacher, I think it was her history teacher, was raving about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her hero and the effect it had. I think whatever year that was that I think she died, whatever year that was the year that she, I think it was around 2021 or whatever, 2020. And I remember thinking to myself, holy crap, what the hell else is she learning? And that's when I started to be more aware, because when kids are in high school, they're kind of on their own, if you will. They're going to do their homework themselves. Maybe they have an issue here or there. But one of the things that got me, that I started a fight with the school, and this is because of that moment when I started to get more discerning. She was in a class in her senior year. Now, these are underage girls, right? 17, whatever. And she was in a college course, and they had to read Lolita. Right. And if anybody knows what Lolita, it's basically there's pedophilia in there and all this kind of stuff. And she came home.
That was what the song is. That's the song. That's about the song. Lolita.
Well,
you know the song. You know the song Lolita.
I don't know the song. I know the movie. I know the book.
Go ahead.
I know the
Continue.
book.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So in any case, she comes home and says, Mom, a little like, my daughter's not prudish or anything. She goes, I'm a little uncomfortable with this whole subject matter. And I said, well, I'm a little uncertain why in an all girls school where you're all underage, why do you have to read this? So I called the dean or whoever the hell I spoke to. And she said, well, we have to have a conference with the English department head. We have this conference, right, that we're on Zoom. And they say to me, that they're picking from college books because this is a college course. I said, I understand that. I said, but is this the only book? I mean, what is the list? How many books are on this list? I said, why? And I found out from my daughter that a lot of the other girls were uncomfortable with the subject matter, but their parents didn't, of course I have a big mouth. They weren't going to step up and ruffle feathers. And they gave me a choice. They said, first they said, if she can't handle this book with pedophilia, I don't know how she's going to handle when we get into, I don't remember what the hell the book was, where we're talking about bestiality and other things. And I said, I have a big question for you. Why am I paying $12,000 a year to send my daughter to a private Catholic school, all girls? I said, to learn these things. I said, number one. Number two, are these the only books? Like, there's no other books that are in the college, grouping of books for them to read? And they argued this with me and gave her a choice that she could stay in the AP class and have to learn this, or she could not have her AP credit and go in a class that she was like basically dumbed down to a level where she wasn't getting credit. And I had to talk with my daughter, and my daughter said to me, you know what, Ma? Fuck them. I'll get through this class because I want to graduate with this course. She goes, but she was so turned off. And I was so turned off thinking, this is what they're this is what they have. This is what some idiot deemed important. No, it's a lot deeper than that.
And to your point, how few children know to ask the questions. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't know to ask. They're not as, they don't think like your daughter did. So, and so what they are is they're just kind of indoctrinated into that, and they think that's normal. When you talk about pedophilia and you talk about a lot of things that happen that are really, really, negative in life, like children that grow up in that environment, really what it boils down to is they think that's normal. That's right. Why they grow up to be pedophiles. Because
they normalize these subjects.
Because they think that's normal.
Wasn't that the point of the feminist agenda?
Yes. That's part of it. Yes.
Partly, yeah. Get women into work. So not just so two parents had to pay taxes, but take the parents away from the children so that then the state was the ones that were educating them.
That's correct.
Them and stuff and take
it was. Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say, just to finish my story, what really turned me off, even more than the school's agenda and the indoctrination, were that there were other girls in her class who expressed, like among the girls, that this was uncomfortable, but the parents didn't take a stand. So did you not take a stand because you just don't want to cause trouble? Or did you not take a stand because you're just as indoctrinated by this system that you don't think you need to take a stand? And that to me was my defining moment of saying, if I ever had to do this over, obviously my kids would grow up, I would homeschool in a heartbeat because even the private parochial schools, in order to get funding and all this other nonsense, they're no different. So they say a prayer in the morning.
That's entire point. That's the entire point of the Department of Education.
Yes.
That was the entire point of the Department of Education, because you see, and so the project that I'm working on right now is, it's massive in scope, because what I'm doing is I'm going back to like the period of just before the war between the states, and I'm looking at every single piece of legislation, every single piece of every policy, specific events, and essentially tracing how those events led to this, and that led to this, and then that led to this, and this, and this, and this, and then it kept morphing and metastasizing until we get to a point where then it becomes almost systemic, and then you get into the progressive era. And the progressive era is where things really start to go off the rails. And, you asked me earlier if I would read this little piece. And here, let me read this, because it kind of this This is kind of it talks about what you're talking about. As a student of history and as somebody who has studied the mechanisms of British imperialism, American isolationism, and the long desire of the British Empire to bring the United States back under its influence, it is my contention that both World War I and World War II were not organic eruptions of conflict, but manifestations of elite manipulation. When you trace the map of the early 20th century, and actually I would argue the late 19th century, the pattern is hard to miss. Palestine was under Ottoman control. Germany was the only European power with a treaty relationship to the Ottoman Turks. By beginning the war in Sarajevo, and that was with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the architects of World War I ensured that Germany would be pulled in through its alliance with Austria-Hungary, and in turn, the Ottoman Empire would be dragged into the conflict as well. The war dismantled the Ottomans and opened Palestine to British administration. And then that's where you get the Balfour Declaration. The same pattern appears again and again. The League of Nations, which was born out of World War I, failed. It wasn't very strong, but that was their first attempt at global government. The same elites who had financed the Bolshevik Revolution and helped rebuild Germany, both Wall Street creations, knowing that another catastrophe would create the need for stronger global institutions, World War II destroyed what remained of Europe. It displaced millions and prepared the moral and political ground for the creation of the United Nations, NATO, the World Bank, the IMF, and ultimately the modern state of Israel. And this isn't offered as dogma or as some but as an overarching philosophy, a lens through which to interpret the past. My contention is that these events were not disconnected events, but steps in a deliberate strategy to reshape the world order. To understand the theological distortions traced in the book, you have to also understand the political and geopolitical machinery behind it, because it's what governs everything we live with today.
Yeah, amazing.
So, Ron, everything we just spoke about all leads into what your message was about the church, right? Because that's a very big institution, obviously, that people have been indoctrinated in. And I think that overarching is this idea of indoctrination and censoring. I don't even want to use the word ship anymore, but censoring that comes together. But could you just explain, because I'm sure our audience is pretty sophisticated, but the Balfour Agreement, because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that was part of this, like you say, this inorganic way that the wars were created, and then what the ultimate goal was perceived to be. Because I don't know how many people are really aware of the Balfour Agreement.
Well, okay, so the Balfour Declaration is essentially when you kind of have to go back to when world you got to go back to really about Theodore Herzl, the formation of the World Zionist Council. I believe that's what it was called. And they first met in Basel, Switzerland, in the late 1800s. I think 1897. I want to say. When they had these ideas that they wanted a land of Palestine, and actually it goes back even much further than that. It goes back in the British hierarchy. They literally had ideas of trying to make. They wanted Palestine to be under Jewish control, even in the mid 1800s, and so in order to do that. In order to get Palestine away from the Ottoman Empire, what they had to do was they had to get the Ottoman Empire into a war, and that I'm sure you guys have heard of the movie Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
Okay, so in World War I, when Germany, so Germany had. When Bismarck kind of created Germany in the 1870, I think is when Germany really kind of came together. It was a collaboration of all these little tiny independent states, much like what we did when we had the revolution in the United States, when all the colonies came together, right? So That happened in Germany in 1870 under Otto von Bismarck. Well, they became a cohesive country, and then they became a very, very large industrial power, and to the point where they were beginning to threaten British hegemony, global hegemony, right? I mean, because up until that point, Britain, the world was Britain, right? I mean, what I think Britain was the first empire that the sun never set on. Stu, you're in the UK, are you not?
I am in the UK. I'm not as much of a historian as you are.
But I mean, I'm sure that did you go to school there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and did they? I mean, I'm sure that they taught very flatteringly the idea of British hegemony and control of the world and things of that nature. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's. I mean, a lot of people used to say is how can a country so small control so much?
Right.
You know.
Mm-hmm. And it was
history used to be one of my least favourite subjects at school. Even playing Trivial Pursuit, I used to hate getting that little yellow piece.
I can relate to that.
Whatever it is,
I hated sports.
And I told Lisa, I woke up in a history lesson when I was 13, and I just sat there and I had this overwhelming thought of, man, this is all bullshit, right? But it's only in my later years, becoming a pattern recognitionist,
yes,
that I have started to learn about history. So at school, I didn't really learn anything because they tried to indoctrinate me into a system that I didn't want to be indoctrinated into, and I didn't know why at the time. So it's only my later years that I've started digging into all this stuff.
It's very interesting that you say that, because it's true. You know, I loved history. History was always my favorite subject, but I was also very good in math. I mean, I was, you know, school came so easy to me, and you know, I mean, if I'm being very honest, I was lazy in school, but it didn't challenge me. Like I more often than not, I was done with my homework before I even left the campus. I was done with homework, and I mean, I had a B+ average all through school. I think I wasn't like at a 4, but I think it was like at a 3.8, and I wasn't even hardly trying. And I don't say that, you know, braggadociously, not at all. I'm just saying school came very easy for me. But the one subject that always captured my imagination was history. I loved history, and more specifically, I loved military history and aviation and things like that. You know, that World War II, Civil War, stuff like that just fascinated me. And it wasn't until later on in life that I really kind of got into World War I a little bit, and now I'm starting to get into some of the periods of history in the United States that I had skipped over. And it's really been eye-opening to me, you know, and I can, when I get into some of these topics, it helps me understand how the Fabian socialists, how they've essentially used history to capture people and to get them to be thinking in a certain way. And, you know, you talked about it, Elisa, about the people. It's like, why would nobody stand up and defend this? They don't stand up and defend it, number one, because they don't know enough to feel confident enough to defend it. And number two, if they do stand up and defend it, typically what's going to happen is that requires them to be assertive in an environment where peer pressure keeps them from being assertive. And if you're not willing to stand up to the peer pressure, regardless of how strong it is, you're not going to say anything. So it's easier to, you know, as they say, go along to get along. Have you ever seen there's a YouTube video out there, and it's called how a movement from start to finish in under 2 minutes, and it's about it shows this kid who's on the side of a hill, he's at a concert or something.
Oh yeah, what, he's having a dog.
And he's just having a great time, just being stupid silly, right? And people are looking at him and they're kind of, they'll laugh or they're mocking him or whatever. But then somebody joins him.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, 2-3 people more join him. And then the next thing you know, the whole hill has joined him. Yeah. Because it's that FOMO, right? It's that fear of missing out. And as long you need the person who's going to stand out there and do the dancing by himself. That person is extraordinarily important in the movement. But the most crucial person in the movement is not the leader, but the first follower. Because the first follower justifies the leader's actions. Yeah. And gives permission for other people to come in and say, I can do it too. Right? And we live in a world where the first follower is extraordinarily rare. We've got lots of leaders, but the leaders sometimes are they're either too intimidated or too timid to stand up. Even though they want to, they're too afraid to do it. So they're very outspoken at home. They're very opinionated at home, but they don't have the courage to do it out in the real world, because then what they do is they risk jeopardizing other people will see how they think, and they don't want to do that, because then it could cost them friendships, it could cost them whatever.
That is the whole thing we've been going through, isn't it? These last 5 years minimum. The whole of COVID was about that. The whole of True thing. We've got loads of brave people coming out and putting their faces out. But like I was saying, it's really hard to get people they want to join you, and they do it silently a lot of the time, but they won't share your stuff and they won't put it out there publicly to other people.
Isn't that here in the States, during the election? I mean, I'm in New York. Do you know how many people were slinkily supporting Trump? Because now here I can argue
that's why they call that big part the silent majority.
Yes, and I could argue that here in New York, you were physically in danger in many times. People were being physical, and harming your property and all that. So yes, that was that, but wasn't that done and orchestrated so that people would feel intimidated? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of that, I'm sure these people were empowered to act like that. And the people that were the silent majority, even if an old man put a MAGA hat on or something, he ran the risk of being hurt. Yeah. Not just verbally, abused, right? We could sticks and stones kind of thing, but hurt. So exactly, Ron. It's like people have been trained, and I think a lot of that has to do with censorship, right? Because of the fact that not enough of us that come out and say things and point to a lot of the information and doing the investigation and all the reason behind what we say isn't allowed to get out there. And I think that's true of all the major institutions, like you said, like whether it's the education department, whether it's the Bible / the church, the medical industry. That's where people that are coming out more and more, now, hopefully, our movement is growing because people are getting a little more empowered, but not as many as we need to because of what's going on with the censoring.
Yeah. There's somebody, I guess, are you guys streaming this to YouTube as well?
Yeah. Is it Dwayne's comment?
I see that. And
which comment?
I see Dwayne.
Yeah, these 4 comments.
Baby boomers are overwhelmed the education system and educators. Thank you. I'm hard. Baby boomers have it's mathematically impossible for baby boomers to have more advanced critical thinking skills than their predecessors. Well, I can't disagree with that. They because their predecessors didn't teach them how to have critical thinking skills, and I think that's the problem. Is that the devolution and I don't mean that from a, you know,
Military.
I don't mean that, but the devolution of the education system, really it goes so deep and so far back. I mean, it goes back to Dewey in the late 1800s and early 1900s when they, when they got a hold of like the American Historical Association. They literally, information that has been put out there, it's sanitized. You have gatekeepers that prevent information from getting out into the public. One of my favorite places to actually get information is from books that are pre-1912. As one, the American Revolution up through the Gilded Age, when you get information from those sources, it's a lot less controlled compared to the information that comes out, after that. And really, I would say one of the primary watershed events was World War I. World War I was the kind of like the cohesion of so many things with the Federal Reserve, especially in the United States. With the Federal Reserve, with the 16th Amendment, with the 17th Amendment, because that was, but a lot of people don't recognize that the Constitution is not supposed to govern everything about. Wait a second here. I'm sitting here regurgitating narratives easily moved through the baby boomers into your idea of conservatism. What are you talking about, bro? What are you talking about? You think I'm a conservative? Okay, I maybe have conservative leanings, but I mean, I don't understand what you're talking about. I mean, it sounds like you're trying to be argumentative. Some of us didn't watch information for political information and kept up with technology that's shaping our. Yeah, so I keep up with technology too. I mean, are you being critical of me, or are you trying to have a productive conversation? I don't understand. Anyway, but when you look at what what really kind of came out of. I was talking about the Constitution. So the Constitution is not supposed to govern the states. The Constitution is only supposed to govern the federal government. But the war between the states really was about a centralization of power. What they did was with the 14th Amendment was they made federalism much more powerful. Then by the progressive era with the inauguration of the 17th Amendment, what they did was they removed the senators who were supposed to represent the states. So that's why there's only 2 senators per state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
right.
There's only 2 senators per state, and the reason for that is because when they had the Great Compromise, that when they were trying to figure out the Constitution a long time ago, they were like, well, how do we get, the bigger states wanted to have a bigger say, and the smaller states wanted to have an equal say. And so what they did was they came up with a compromise. They would have a bicameral legislature. So you had one that was based on population, and then you had another one that was exclusively based on the amount of states. So every state, regardless of size or population, had an equal representation. That was the Senate. Well, the senators were never elected by the people. The senators were elected by the state legislatures to represent the state governments at the federal level. And the 17th Amendment removed that. The 17th Amendment made the senators now be voted in by the people. And by doing that, you completely neuter the state's ability to have control over the budget. And then you have, with the formation of the Federal Reserve, what you now had is instead of money flowing inward to the federal government from the states, now the federal government controls the money, and then the money goes out to the states. How many times has California asked, oh, we need federal funds, we need this, we need money? the Department of Education. They will give you federal money if you abide by this. So everything was kind of flipped on its head back in the early 20th and in the early part of the 20th century with the Federal Reserve Act, the 15th or the 15th, I'm sorry, the 16th and 17th Amendments in tandem with the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. And that's exactly the situation that we live with today. And I think so many conservatives and Democrats alike, everybody looks to the president. Everybody thinks, oh, well, if we just get Trump in there, everything is going to be fine. Trump's not a dictator. We don't live in a dictatorial system. We never have. So why would we think that one man is going to come in and solve all our problems? He's not. He can't. That's not the way the system works. I mean, it's not 1930s Germany where you've got a dictator that comes in and fixes it. Even though in certain cases, that may very well be what we would need to have to fix the situation, because I don't trust the people that have been miseducated for the last 50 to 100 years, who have devolved that education. I don't trust them to fix the problems because they don't know history. They don't know what problems need to be fixed.
Talking about Trump being a dictator and stuff like that, what do you think about him keep mentioning this Article 2 and I have the power to do whatever I want to do, and this whole potential military operation behind him?
Ask me that one more time. I'm sorry.
Talking about Trump being a dictator or dictatorial powers,
Mm-hmm.
he's mentioned on many occasions, I can use Article 2. I have Article 2. It gives me the power to do what I want. And in that respect, with obviously a lot of us think there's this military operation going on behind him.
Mm-hmm.
How much power do you think he has, or the military have, in this situation unfolding?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I literally started a piece yesterday. Where I'm going back through all of the pieces of legislation where either the Senate or the Congress or the House of Representatives or the Senate essentially ceded power that was vested in them to the executive branch. And I recall a time when I recall this, but I can't find a record of it, where Trump said something about the executive branch has more power now than they've ever had ever before. And I can't find the exact comment, but whether or not that comment is valid, or whether or not he actually said it or not, it is true. The executive branch has way more power than it was ever intended to have. But even with that power, there's still things that he can't do. Like, so for example, like recently when he changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War, that was cosmetic, but it's cosmetic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's still the Department of Defense in practice, but but how it's referred to now is the Department of War. So it's almost like a nickname. But because you need Congress to actually change it. So
I mean, Trump said many times as well, isn't he, that I am a wartime president, and there's a lot of talk. We have been at war for a lot longer back before Trump.
We've so technically we've essentially been at war. Really almost if you really want to be honest about it, we technically never ceased being at war after the war between the states.
Yeah.
But that said, they need declaration. You're supposed to have a declaration of war to conduct war. And the only two times that I'm aware of in the 20th century where a declaration of war came through the Congress was for World War I and World War II. But that's it. Did they declare? I don't think they declare. You can't declare in the war on terror. that wasn't really a war against a specific country. So
Right.
you can't declare war against an ideology, which is exactly what they did, and really all that is, and they've justified conflict, because they can justify it however they want, and people are going to go along with it because nobody's going to have the courage to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that. The people are going to do it,
Well, part of it is having the courage. The other part is not being indoctrinated into believing that it's, that it makes sense. And like you said, they use emotion to get people to want to go along with these agendas, and oftentimes come out of that system and realize, right, like we can name so many things that after the fact people said, wait a minute, what are we doing, or how come that happened, or what was the real cause, or who was behind it, or who's making the money, or all those things. But when they hit the emotional in the emotions in people, that's what gets them to rise up and act. And usually you have a small group that don't buy into it.
This guy Dwayne is actually kind of funny to me because he doesn't think he thinks I'm coming at this from a conservative perspective, and anybody who knows me knows that I may have conservative ideals, but I don't identify with any political party at all. In fact, I'm probably one of the biggest critical thinkers, and try to be open-minded as I possibly can. So, and that's, listen, I have a friend. I have a good friend. I love her to death. She's black and is, buys into all the woke stuff, sends me stuff, has TDS on a massive level. It works for the state of California, and is, went to the California state system. So, I mean, I have to constantly deal with things that she sends me, and it actually keeps me it keeps me grounded in that. And you know what? There's things that she sends that I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. I agree with that. And then there's things that she sends and I'm like, I just reject that outright. But I get a lot of information. I actually don't have television. I mean, I haven't watched I think I turned cable off in 2011. So, I don't watch TV. I see new stuff, but I mean, even now it's like, I don't trust anything. I generally will wait a good, 36 to 72 hours before I'll even comment on things that are happening, that are current events, because number one, I don't trust shit. Both the left and the right lie to you. There's everybody has an agenda, and the only agenda that I have is very libertarian minded. It's like live and let live. Let everybody, if you want to do it, fine. As long as you're not harming anybody, as long as you're not forcing anybody into doing anything, and you're not causing anybody any bodily harm, then do whatever you want to do. I don't care. So
that is predominantly common law, isn't it? And constitutional law.
Yeah, 100%. It's like
loss or injury, isn't it?
I don't, it's like, leave me alone to be me. And you look at, like, let's look at the LGBT thing.
Just going to say that
it's to me, it's like, it's not enough to, if you want to be homosexual, fine. You do you. What consenting adults do behind closed doors is none of my business. I don't care. I don't judge. And I think that Christians oftentimes are their own worst enemies, because they are way more judgmental than anybody else, because they feel like they have the moral high ground. And I reject that notion as somebody who is a Christian. To me, it's more important to let people be themselves and to love them how they are, where they come from, and let them be them. And if they do things that I disagree with, is if they claim to be a Christian and it goes against something that is a bit, that is scriptural, then it's my duty as a Christian to call them out on it in private. But it's not my duty to condemn them publicly. And I think too many Christians do that publicly. And really what they're doing is while they're publicly condemning other people, they're behind the scenes living in the exact same hypocritical way. So oftentimes I tend to think that Christians are their own worst enemies. And I think that's true even with political parties and other things. Anytime you get a group of people where you get groupthink, I'm the opposite of groupthink. So
well, yeah, I mean, I have seen that in religious circles and spiritual circles, that there's this still people look down on other people a lot, i.e., I'm more spiritual than her, or, she's not as religious as me, and things like that. It's just so catty everywhere,
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely catty.
And it's very
it's definitely catty,
but it's also, if you're a Christian or a person who feels connected to God, then you have to ask yourself, is that what the person I follow would be doing? I mean,
right? Yeah.
I mean,
well, when you look in the Bible and you look at who Christ hung out with, who did he hang out with? He hung out with the sick people. He hung out with the prostitutes. He hung out with all of the people that were destitute, all the poor people. He wasn't hanging out with the rich people. He was hanging out with all the dregs of society.
Yeah, exactly.
And because he realized that those are the people that needed it the most. And I think I think sometimes conservatives, they kind of feel like, a lot of times conservatives have a lot of money, and they'll hold on to it, or they'll donate. I mean, if you look at the United States, I think we lead the world in donations. In terms of, like, if there's some sort of a catastrophic event someplace around the world, the Americans give so much of their personal money to causes if they feel like it's going to help somebody. And I think that's kind of in our DNA, right? That's in our DNA, and I'm proud of that. I look at the
But I would disagree with you. I would disagree with you about the finance and the wealth, because I think you can make just as much of an argument. I'm living in New York, and I think when you get to the levels of certain amount of money, you're not really with a particular party, so to speak. Okay, you're living in a different world than a lot of the average people in this country are. And I would almost make an argument that you've got just as many liberals that are wealthy, that are, especially when you, right? So it's not really a money issue per se when it comes to, because listen, you could have liberal views. We all, even as if you label yourself a conservative, right, or you label yourself a liberal, you have probably personally, you have values that go into both camps. So it's the labeling that becomes the problem, and that's what they've used to break us into camps, right? Like, I had people that my kids went to school with that were far more conservative than me, in the way they lived, in what they let their children do, and how they viewed things.
Okay, so define that, because that could be.
They went to church I'll define it, right? They went to church every Sunday. Their kids weren't allowed to have cell phones until until a much older age. The way they expected them to dress, if they allowed them to go out to different places to hang out. Like, to me, they were more not political party, but
they were more restricted. They were more restricted.
More restricted, more reserved. They had a little stronger hand on their kids with what they want. Okay. However, they identified with being liberal in a political way. And when I would get into conversations, sometimes I'd say, wait, like, let's just pull emotion out of this. But you're identifying with this particular candidate who has this, and this that they stand on their platform. And yet you live with these values. How do you reconcile that?
They
would stop and think.
That is such a great question, and it honestly, that's one that I wrestle with because the friend that I told you about, she is as devout a Christian as you will find. And I mean, like, I don't know anybody that I can say that is as devout as she is, and as like devoted to like waking up at a certain hour so that she can read and pray and do all the things that, and to actually devote time to God, out of her personal life, to devote time. And and is extraordinarily strict about it. And it baffles me when people have that devotion, yet the very same ideals that they tolerate in the world are essentially contradictory to what Scripture
Exactly.
says. As
And it's
to
not
me,
even
that is,
right.
yeah.
It's not even the Christian aspect of it or the
Mhm.
devoutness of it. It's
Right.
how you're living. If you're against, for example, abortion, how could you support a candidate who's saying it's okay and is behind it and is for things like partial birth abort? I'm going back like a number of years.
Right. Mhm.
And until I had this very calm, because these people were lovely, I had the conversations. They were dumbfounded and didn't know what to say because they hadn't put the two pieces together. They heard certain things, or they were indoctrinated to think that, if you're part of this group or that group, you automatically should be, in the Democratic camp. And if you're part of, but they never actually took that look at what this person or candidate or collective political party is saying that they are behind and push, versus how that relates to how you live your life. And I said, you, even though I identified at the time more with the conservative candidate,
I
said,
this is funny. This is funny. What poor red states do we live in? Long
do
Island
you live
and
in?
Long
Yeah,
Island and
far from a red
Long Island.
state.
Yeah, Long Island and Southern California.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
it's funny, Ron, because when I said that, I said, listen, you live a much more conservative life than me, much more. You're much more restrictive with your children. I don't go to church every Sunday. I said, and when I put it to them like that, they didn't have an answer, but it gave them a lot to think about. And trust me, they wanted to understand more, because you know why? They were blindly following rules about who they should vote for without actually knowing what was the platform and how do I personally fit in with that platform. Again, it's about the labels and the peer pressure.
Yeah. Well, and that is that's what you're talking about in terms of the peer pressure. That is societal, and it really kind of originates within the school system, and that's why do you know what the original purpose of the public school system was?
I would you mean you're talking about cabal reason or just
in the United States post Revolutionary War, what was the purpose of the public school system?
Was it to get people to have a group think?
Nope.
No.
It was to teach people how to read so they could read the Bible.
Well,
okay.
That was
so the original reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Well, I mean, it was basic education, obviously,
Basic
because
skills.
if you have basic education, then you can grow. But I mean, keep in mind that after the Revolutionary War, we were still very much an agrarian society. We weren't very industrial. We didn't start to become industrial until about the 1830s, 1840s, into the 1850s. I mean, shoot, by the time the what they call the Civil War broke out, I think the entire economic and industrial output of New York exceeded the entire Confederate portion of the United States. I mean, that's because most of the wealth and the industry was concentrated in the North, and in the South it was very agrarian. And that was why that was why they had the slaves. But the people in the South actually knew that slavery was on its way out. They knew it was on its way out. And when they say that the war was about slavery, in a way that it was, but not in the way that people think, they many people in the South wanted to end slavery. They wanted to do it, but they wanted to do it in a way that was gradual. And if you look back at what the British Empire did when they ended slavery, I think it was they ended the slave trade in what, like 1803 or 1804 or something like that. But they didn't end actual slavery, the practice of slavery, until the 1830s. And when they did, it was they did it in a way that it was like it was almost like it was gradual. It was like, okay, well, you had to go through this, you had to go through like training and how to be a responsible citizen, because you're no longer going to be, you know, taken care of on a plantation, or, you know, in some place. They were going to have to take care of themselves, and they hadn't had any training on how to do that within.
They were institutionalized, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And it wasn't perfect. You know, a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people rebelled against it. And, you know, I mean, listen, I'm not advocating. I'm the furthest thing from advocating slavery. But getting back to the point about in the United States, a lot of people in the South knew that slavery was going to come to an end, and they weren't necessarily fighting to keep it because they wanted it from a barbaric, you know, most of what we think of today in terms of slavery comes from, you know, seeing movies like Django Unchained or Roots or something like that, right? We have this idea of what slavery was like, that it was just these, you know, rich white Christian guys who all they wanted to do was just beat the shit out of people. It's like, that's not what it was. I mean, if you go back and you read the WPA papers that were taken back in the 1930s, when they literally, there was like this massive government organization to go out and find anybody who had been a slave, and interview them before they passed on. And I think they got something like 5,000 or 6,000 accounts of from people who'd actually been slaves. And it was essentially divided in thirds. You had a third of the people who spoke very fondly of the people who were their masters. You had another third that was like, you know, it was like, it wasn't horrible, it wasn't great, but it wasn't, you know, they were more neutral about it. But it wasn't like this barbaric thing that Hollywood portrays today. And then you have another third that did say, you know, how horrible it was. And but the thing is that the third that talked about the barbarity, really, those were the people that were on the massive plantations. But not all slaves in the United States were on the plantations. A good chunk of them, in fact, I'd say probably over half, actually were part of, like, it was with a single family, and oftentimes they lived in the same house. They actually lived in the house.
They were domestic slaves. But I want to add to that, Ron, because I think, and again, I'm not a proponent of that either, but I want to make 2 points about this since we've digressed here. And it comes back to this indoctrination thing. So the one issue that we talk about with the war against the North and between the North and the South is that a lot of it also came down to economics, which we could be here forever talking about that influence. And slavery was that topic that, again, was very emotional, right? That people got very emotional. But when we talk about slavery, you know, that's a very broad topic. There's the obvious physical, you know, owning of another person. But you also have to look at, like you said, these people were sort of institutionalized, where they were taken care of, they were fed, they were clothed, they oftentimes lived in the household with the people, right? Many of the accounts, if you ever read some of the accounts of some of the children who were raised with slaves, they viewed that slave almost like more closely than they viewed their own parent, because they took care of them.
It was almost it was like a sibling relationship.
Yeah, there was like a love. But look at the North, who did not have slavery per se, and the conditions under which they were living in, children working in factories. Like, Who's the slave? Wasn't it all conclusive that everybody has really been a slave, and it's this emotional thing that they get people to, and then divide, right? So they'll divide the whites against the blacks. Like, it's
Right.
all been this way of indoctrinating people. And it's very funny because if the 20th century, with a lot of these movies, like you say, and again, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that it was right, but they don't show the other side, that percentage of people who said, you know, I wasn't treated so badly.
Listen,
Not that you want them to stay that way.
Well, listen, the United States government as a whole has been extraordinarily I don't want to say, I don't know if ruthless is the right word, but the things that they've done to the black community are beyond reproach. Absolutely, unequivocally, the things that have been done to the black population. But it's not the government per se as much as it is the elites and like take Tulsa for example. All right, are you familiar with Tulsa? The example in Tulsa with Black Wall Street. You guys know about that?
No.
So back in the early 1920s, I want to say 1923, I think, Tulsa had an area called Greenwood, which had an enormous black population that was thriving beyond anything that almost they actually had a higher wealth per capita than white people in the country. It was one of the most wealthiest portions of the country. It was called Black Wall Street, and there was a kid who went into an elevator. He had to go to the restroom, and he went downtown, and he had to go up to the 5th floor, go to the restroom, and he got back into the elevator, and he came back down, and I don't know if he stumbled and fell, but the elevator operator was a young girl who she fell or something, or her clothes got ripped or whatever. Anyway, the story was put out in the newspaper that this kid tried to rape the young black kid tried to rape this young black girl. And that's not what happened. The police said, no, that's not what happened. But the papers ran with the story. They put it out. And the next thing you know, it was about a 10-to-1 ratio of whites to blacks. And the white ire had been raised to such a degree that they literally went and they burned the entire freaking town down, killed almost 300 people, died that day, or died over the course of a couple of days. And it was because the newspaper ran with a story that was bullshit. And they were the ones that incited the violence. It wasn't now the people may have had these attitudes, but the attitudes were inflamed by the newspaper. And I don't necessarily think, I think it was very, very reminiscent of something that happened like with the George Floyd things. Okay. I don't think a lot of the Black Lives Matter people are evil people. I think they're people who genuinely believe that they're treated poorly and they went out to protest. Okay. But you have the agent provocateurs that will get out there and then they'll go and light the fires and burn shit down. And in some cases, that guy from MSNBC who said that it was mostly peaceful, you know what? There's merit to that.
That goes back to that guy dancing in the field one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's merit to that. There is mostly peaceful stuff, but just because things are mostly peaceful doesn't mean that you don't have the agent provocateurs. And I mean, the same thing happened with J6. There's agent provocateurs in there. And what happens is that these agent provocateurs will get intermingling in with the people that they may have different political, philosophical views than you, but that doesn't mean that we can't get along, right? I mean, we've had political divisions all our lives, but why do we have to be so argumentative about it?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a great little graph, a diagram for that I was trying to find, but the left have gone so far that way and the right have gone so far that way that the people in the middle are actually starting to see a common ground. A lot of conservatives got values and same sort of thing.
If you did a if you did a test, like where you took people and you had them, you gave them like a blind test with it was like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think? If going down this list where it was like rather comprehensive, I would venture to say that the people on the right and the people on the left agreed with a bunch of things they would come to an agreement on, and then there would be about 15% that we disagreed on. 5% we probably vehemently disagreed on, and another 10% that we had disagreements with, but we could tolerate each other, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you really want to go, if you want to just pick two issues that are probably the most incendiary, is you're going to have on the right, you're going to have the Second Amendment, on the left you're going to have abortion or LGBT, right? Well, those are the two things that are probably that probably get the most play in that arena. But outside of those things, I think the vast majority of people generally are in agreement with a lot of things. I used to watch Dan Bongino, or I used to listen to Dan Bongino. This is back in my 2018-19. When I listened to him, and he said something one time, and it's always stuck with me. And he says, the left looks at people, and or the right looks at people on the left, and they say that they're good people with bad ideas, and the left looks at people on the right as bad people with ideas.
Mm.
And I think, that's this whoever this person is in the chat who's just, trying to bomb the chat. He is somebody, or he or she or it or they or them or Z or whatever the fuck, this person wants to be called. They look at the three of us, and we are bad people with ideas. Because we don't conform to what this individual wants us to conform to.
No.
Well, more importantly, why are you watching? I mean, when I don't agree with something and I don't like something, I don't want to be near it. So if you're not enjoying it, we're very sorry. But
it's antagonizing. He's just being antagonizing, and I'm not gonna let this person get under my skin. So.
No. Don't. Can I ask you a question, Ron? Going back to the Bible stuff, what you said about the invention, school to get to kids to read and watch the Bible, and we started off this podcast with saying everyone needs to really have an open mind about everything. And I say this, I've got many friends in this truther movement that they are very Bible orientated, and they take that as the gospel, as the truth, and the 66 books and stuff like that. But we know with investigation that, or potentially, there are missing books to this. There are books that have been hidden. There's stuff that's been taken and put under the Vatican. Was it written by men? The Council of Nicaea, King James has changed it. It's been fucked about with all the time. What would you say to those people that they need to open their mind a little bit more?
It's interesting that you say that, because in here I do refer to a lot of the non-canonical things. And you know what I mean by canonical?
No.
Okay. So in the Bible, there's what they call the canon, that's CANON, and that is everything that's canon, like the American Constitution is canon, right? It is something.
Isn't canon church law?
Right. Right. Okay. So when you say non-canonical, what you're saying is that it's something that falls outside of what they considered canon.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So, and that's like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Adam and the Book of Moses, all those things. So, I am somebody who believes that those books are absolutely important. Listen, I don't know what I don't know. And as somebody who's extraordinarily suspicious of power and institutions, it's sometimes it's hard for me to go in and say, oh yeah, well that's absolutely fact. I won't say that. You're not gonna put me into a corner. And I'm not going to plant my flag and die on that hill. I'm just not. No. I don't know the answer to the question that you just asked. I know, but I mean, but what I do is I take what is today, what is scripture, and I think I said that in my when I read the when I read my introduction. I remember how I said I think we have this romantic idea that religion and things, these are protected by God. We have this romantic idea that what is that what we get, that it's all protected. God protects it, from corruption on earth. And I have come to the realization that I don't believe that that's true anymore. I think that men do corrupt it. And is it possible that the Council of Nicaea corrupted it and that the Catholic Church held back a whole bunch of things? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't, like I said, I don't know what I don't know, but that said, I go with what is considered canon today. And then I also include in here, many other books and other periodical pieces, because I think what they do, I like to use the analogy of when you go to a movie, like one of my favorite movies of all time is Gladiator. Love Gladiator. And yeah, and so, but Gladiator, the motion picture Gladiator, was only like 2 hours in the theater, about an hour, like 2 hours and 10 minutes or something like that. And I think that's kind of like the sweet spot of what they try to get in terms of a movie. But when a movie comes out on DVD, then they'll have they'll have the director's cut or the extended director's cut, right? And it's interesting when you watch the extended cuts, what you get is you get a much better understanding of what happened. And that's what that meant when that happened. I didn't connect those two dots, right? And I think that when you read some of the non-canonical period texts of the period, I think what that does is it broadens your understanding and it gives color to the scriptures and to how to understand the scriptures. And I think too often what we do is from a Christian perspective is we open the Bible and we read it as though it's something that is relevant to us here right now. And it is, but the one fact that I think people don't take into consideration is the hermeneutical principle of audience relevance. So Stu, let's say that you're coming out to Southern California and you took an Uber. You're going to take an Uber from LAX to my house because you come out to see me, right? Well, the Uber has an accident or they get a flat tire or something, and there's nobody else to come and get you. You're stuck on the side of the road, and I tell you, and you call me and say, "Hey, dude, I'm stuck. I can't get there." I'm like, "Okay, well, I'll be right there. I'm going to come get you, right? I'll be there as quick as I can." Well, if I don't show up, then what does that mean? It means I lied to you. You're still sitting on the side of the road. All right. Well, if somebody picks up our communication and looks at it 10 years from now, could they infer that I was saying that I'm going to come and that if they're stuck on the side of the road that I'm going to come and get them? No. And I think, and that's what happens with most Christians today. What they're doing is they're picking up the Bible and they're looking at it as though it's relevant to us now. The principles are relevant, but the actual words we have to read them. In my humble opinion, we should read them and interpret them as though they were intended for the audience that they were written to. When you open up scripture and you read the New Testament or even the Old Testament, I mean, the Old Testament is basically kind of like a chronological history of what happened. The New Testament is really just kind of like a collection of letters that were sent to people. A letter that was sent to the Romans, a letter that was sent to the Thessalonians, a letter that was sent to the Colossians. You know what I mean? So these are letters that were sent to these churches by the apostles, trying to help them, understand certain things. And when that well, you know, we can't read that. That's their mail. That's not our mail. That's their mail. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't get an idea of how it would overlay and apply to us, you know, in today's world. But I think that more often than not, I think what has happened and what my book kind of talks about a little bit is how the church was transformed into reading the scriptures as to where we are now, much more so than to what the original church was supposed to understand. And that was done deliberately. And I think one of the most acute things that you could point to is basically the defense of Israel. The defense of Israel as, you know, the modern Israel as biblical Israel. And, you know, when you look back in the Old Testament, anytime that Israel was disobedient to God, what happened? They were overthrown and they were taken into captivity. And then when they repented and they became obedient, then it's kind of like the Tytler cycle happened a couple of times within the Bible, right? You know what the Tytler cycle is?
No.
The Tytler cycle is you go from spiritual awakening into a time of abundance, into greed, into apathy.
Oh yes, yeah.
And then into subjugation.
It's like weak men create hard times create.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, and I think, you know, the Tytler cycle actually occurred probably, you know, at least 2 or 3 times in the Old Testament, you know, as visible in how the chronological, how it happened. But every time that Israel was rewarded with the land back in Canaan or Palestine, it was rewarded because they became obedient again. Well, I mean, does anybody know what the modern day Jews who essentially they worship the Talmud? I mean, does anybody know what the Talmud says about Jesus?
Yes. Well, I don't, but I know the Talmud is the not so nice version of the Torah, isn't it?
No. 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 They're not even remotely connected or related. No. The Talmud says that Jesus is a false prophet who is heretical and is literally in hell, boiling in excrement.
There's a lot of paedophilia and stuff in the Talmud, isn't there?
Yes, and the Talmud is you can have sex with a girl. I want to say it's like it's either 2 or 8, whatever. I think it's 2 years old. You can literally have sex with a female at 2 years old.
Now, that could bring us, of course, we're coming to the end, but that could bring us into a whole other discussion of how the Jewish religion was basically hijacked at one point in history by the Khazarians, et cetera, and that these messages and the things we've been talking about relate to, what is Israel, and Israel, the Bible versus a state, what they wanted us to think, and all these other things. And again, we have to make it really clear when we're talking about the Jewish people, we're not talking about the Jewish people.
So there's a distinction there. When in AD 70, when the temple was destroyed by the Roman army, because with the Jewish-Roman war that happened between AD 68 and AD 70, the temple was destroyed by the Roman army. When that happened, you destroyed all of the genealogical records. So now, I don't have any doubt that there were people of Jewish heritage who survived that event. I mean, in fact, the vast majority of the first church was predominantly made up of Jews.
Right.
Christ himself was Jewish. So
That's
a lot of the Jews. I mean, look at Paul. Paul was like a Pharisee, and he literally was persecuting Christians, thinking that he was doing the right thing. And then on the road to Damascus, he got blinded, and then I say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then all of a sudden, he had his paradigm shift. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then he became one of the biggest apologists and advocators for Christ. So the a lot of people haven't had that yet. So but and I kind of just lost my train of thought there.
Well, I think we started off by saying that we're not talking about like the Jewish people, like us, like
Okay,
Jewish
so thank
people.
you,
We're
thank you.
talking about the system and just like with
Yes.
the Catholic Church, we're talking about Catholics. We're talking about the structure systems and the control that these structure systems have had and what they've done.
And I think I started to mention it earlier, and I failed to get to it. I think I failed to complete the thought. Is that when I look at the United States, I think the United States can really be divided into two categories. You have the United States government, which is essentially like an administrative apparatus that governs the country, right? But then you have the Constitution and the idea of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what I hold on to is the idea of the United States. Because the government and the Constitution, I mean, they not the Constitution hasn't been corrupted, but the interpretation of the Constitution has been corrupted. And but a lot of the Constitution was essentially based on the Magna Carta, things that a lot of the positive things that we got from Britain.
Yes.
I mean, let's be real. Britain was one of the greatest forces for good in the world, but that doesn't mean that everything they did was good.
Yeah.
But same thing can be said for the United States.
Yes, and we talk about the Constitution, but we also have to look back at the Articles of Confederation, which at its core is where a lot of our rights do come from, which is a whole other conversation.
Okay, so the Articles of Confederation, the Articles of Confederation it was good, but it was too weak. It was too weak of a central government. And what happened was when the Constitution came along, what they did was they tried to make it to have a little bit stronger central government. And there were a lot of people who did not that did not sign on to the Constitution. They didn't want anything to do with the Constitution. They thought it was going to, if you read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, a lot of the Anti-Federalists, man, it's like you read the stuff that they read, and it's like where we are today. I mean, you talk about prophetic. It just happened 250 years after what they thought it was going to be. They thought it was going to be all instantaneous, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: is I don't think that the men who believed in the federal ideals, I don't think they believed them with the idea that they wanted to be totalitarian. I just think they believed that in order to govern effectively, you needed to have a little bit stronger of a central government. And but they didn't necessarily think that was ultimately going to become tyrannical. But how things are interpreted over time, it gets skewed. Like for example, separation of church and state. I talk about that in my book here. Separation of church and state was, what was separation of church and state? Do you know? I mean, I don't want to. I want to ask. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to know. Do you know what that means, and do you know where it came from?
Well, my opinion is that our country was founded by many people who wanted religious freedom to practice their faith however they wanted, not be dictated to. So separation meant that the government could not step in and dictate about the church or how you worship, not the fact that it wasn't that God and their beliefs weren't a part of every system that we have in our country.
1,000%. You hit the nail. You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right.
Twisted that. They've twisted that so that people are confused now. So if you say God in school, it goes against it's separation of church and state because they don't know.
I'm going to read to you something here because I think it's when you see it, you'll be like, holy crap. You're going to be like, holy crap. Okay. And this is in my first chapter. Like, how did a country that was founded on Christian principles drift so far? Let's look at what happened in the United States over the past 60 years once prayer was removed from school.
Yep.
1962, prayer removed from school. 1963, Bible reading removed from school. 1960s and 70s, sexual revolution and the rising divorce rates erode the family. 1973, pornography becomes mainstream and legally protected. Miller versus California. 1973, abortion legalized. Roe v. Wade. 1970s to 80s, feminism redefines gender roles and weakens family structure. 1980s onward, separation of church and state twisted to silence Christians in public life. 1980s, ongoing, crosses are removed from public seals, logos, and memorials. 1980s to 90s, consumer Christianity grows, reducing faith to self-help. That's what is referred to as the health wealth gospel. I'll tell you that in a second. The 80s to 2000s, nativity scenes are removed from public property through legislation. That's Lynch v. Donnelly. And those were allowed. But subsequently, cases like Allegheny County versus the ACLU restricted them further. And the ACLU was really created. One of the guys who founded the ACLU, it's in his he graduated from Harvard, and it's in his Harvard yearbook in his annual. He literally says it plainly that his objective is to turn the United States into a communist country. He literally says that. 80s through the 10 Commandments are systematically removed from courthouses, schools, and public buildings. 1990s to 2000s, Christmas is renamed a winter holiday in schools and public institutions. 2000s, homosexuality increasingly normalized in culture and law. 2000s and ongoing, high school graduation prayers are restricted or eliminated. Public university Christian groups required to allow non-Christian leaders or lose recognition or funding. So think about that. You're in an organization in college, and it's a Christian organization. And if you don't allow a non-Christian to come in there, then you run the risk of losing money from the institution to help you with your organization. 2000 to 2010, Merry Christmas is discouraged in favor of Happy Holidays. 2010's wedding cake bakers, florists, and photographers are sued for declining to serve same-sex ceremonies or on religious grounds. 2015, same-sex marriage is legalized. 2010 to 20s, military chaplains are restricted from praying in Jesus' name in public ceremonies. Same time frame, 2010 to 20s, transgender ideology is institutionalized in schools, government, and corporations. Ongoing, government expands into family, education, and morality while Christians are retreating. Ongoing racial grievances movements are weaponized to deepen division in churches and society. It's like, how in the world did we as a Christian country go from serving God to this?
Well, you nailed it there, reading that out. It was almost like I was talking to Elisa last week about those 11 protocols of the Frankfurt School and stuff, and what they've done to society.
I was playing a game with AI the other day, and I said, in the United States, how many planks there are 10 planks to the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah.
And how many planks in the Communist Manifesto do you think are actually in play in the United States, if not ironclad, done? And I said, I have a figure in my head, but before I tell you how many I think it is, I want to hear what you think. And it said 9. Now I said 8. I actually said 8, but it said 9, and I can understand where it would get 9, but But yeah, you look at that, and I mean, we literally have we've literally become that. And for those, for people who don't know history, they look at what I mean. Are you familiar with the Reese Committee and Norman Dodd?
Mhm.
You are?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Norman Dodd was he was a banker on Wall Street in like the 1930s, and when he was a middle-aged man, he was basically conscripted by this politician out of Tennessee who was the name of Reese, and he wanted to investigate all of these foundations: Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, things like that. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to know what are they doing? And Norman Dodd was with his with the gal who was helping him, and he's in the Carnegie Endowment offices, and the guy who's running it literally says to him that their objective is to merge the United States with the Soviet Union. That was their objective, and this is in the 1950s. Now, you know who Julius Rosenberg was?
Yeah.
Who is he? She.
Julius Rosenberg. He was a communist, right? So that went to, I believe his case went to the Supreme Court, and they were, I don't know if it went to the Supreme, but they were executed.
They were executed for why? For giving the Soviet Union secrets on building nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
For giving the Soviet Union secrets to building nuclear weapons. Okay. Are you familiar with Anthony Sutton?
No.
Anthony Sutton was a member of the Hoover Institution, and he was an author and a researcher, historian, and he wrote 3 books: Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and Wall Street and FDR. And
I've heard of him now. It's familiar, but I've never read them.
Yeah. Okay. And then he also wrote a book called National Suicide. I think ultimately that name got changed to The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. And what he was talking about in there was he was talking about how the United States government was literally they were sending the Soviet Union graphite and aluminum tubes as early as 1944. Now, for those of you who don't have any idea what the heck that means, those are things that you need to build nuclear weapons. So the United States government was sending the materials to the Soviet Union to build nuclear weapons before we detonated Trinity. Trinity wasn't detonated until July of 1945. And in 1944, we were already sending the Russians the materials to build the weapon.
So here's the thing, that the takeaway on some of this that we've been talking about. All of these major shifts that have moved us closer to, or pulled us away, let's say, to our founding, are made to look like lone people, or just this, like this crazy woman who wants to end prayer in school, and this woman who gets pregnant and just doesn't want to have her baby, and what it is a whole system that they're using this one person, if you will, to bring forth a change that is a radical agenda that's been, in place, that's happened. And that's where critical thinking needs to happen, because when you think of a system like taking prayer to school, or making, abortion such a major issue, which we know behind it what's really going on with that, and why they want women to abort their own flesh and blood, you have to think how You know, it's like
it's part of the eugenics movement that came out of, and it's part of the eugenics movement that came out of the progressive era with Margaret Sanger. I mean, you know, Darwin, all these guys, these Fabian socialists that came out of England in the latter 19th century, and then the Frankfurt School and all these people that came, you know, it's this stuff that has polluted the United States. And
but the question is, Ron, did it just come from there? In other words, were they the originators, or was there a much bigger agenda that they became more of the front person?
I would say that they were the originators. I would say that that idea came from the moneyed interests of the aristocracy in Europe. That's where.
Right.
That's
so
where,
I'm saying it's not like it's never just one person or this. No. It's the person, like you said, that comes out and maybe is the author of these ideas or thoughts, but is a much bigger system that has been around. And it's the same system in many ways we're still fighting today. When you talk about the deep state and you talk about all these institutions that we are basically in this war of good and evil, right? When you break it all down. And that's where this paradigm in the way people think, hopefully, and I'm going to get spiritual here, but you know, you can't get out of this control system if you are not operating on a higher vibration, because when you're in that lower vibration that they've put us in, we're in fear. You can't think straight. You don't use critical thinking. You're not using all your senses the right way. You're not connecting with God and higher powers. And that's where we are right now in a lot of things, because the Great Awakening is about raising the vibration, so people start to take back that ability to think clearly and become more sovereign about everything in our lives.
I don't disagree with that. You know, the only point of contention that I have is, you know, I look at what you're talking about there as I agree with 99% of it. I caution myself with the whole notion of, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. I'm cautious about, you know, the 5D and the ascension and things of that nature from the standpoint of us becoming. I mean, I do believe that we are spiritual beings, 1,000%. I agree with that. But I also think that we are spiritual beings that are in a hierarchical structure, and I don't believe that we ourselves can become gods. And I think that there's a lot of times, I think some of the movements actually try to put us into a situation where we become on the same plane as God. And I'm careful to differentiate myself with things like that, but at the same time, that, you know, just because we can be spiritual beings and think critically and be clear-minded and like you talk about, I think, am I dancing around it delicately enough?
Well, I don't agree. I agree with you. I don't agree that we're gods, but listen, we're all have God within us. So
1,000%.
So that's what connects us all. And that's why we are all one. And these divisions and these divisive systems that have been put in place are meant to not put us all together, because the wonderful things we could all be doing and the power we could have to do that. But they keep us in this low, you know, slave system, if you will, because then you can't affect these wonderful things. And you know, and that's what we're sort of in this fight. So like I'm in agreement with what you're saying. But I think we all have God in us and are the same.
And I don't know if I articulated what I was trying to say properly. I think you understood what I was trying to say. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is, I don't. It's not for humans to be God, but that doesn't mean that we can't be godly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Agreed.
Maybe that's a better way to say it. And to be godly and to have that, you know, to have that ability to think clearly, to you know, to come out and actually like you say, you know, raise your vibration enough to the point where you're thinking clearly and above what the, all of this low level minutia that keeps us emotionally bound to stuff that's meaningless. It's just, this person left a long time ago. Thank God. One of the things he said in there, or whatever, talked about how Q was a psyop, and yes, that's exactly true. But if you look at what that psyop was, it was, in my humble opinion, there's 5 categories of you've got the drops themselves. You had the people who were interpreting them, who I will equate them to like preachers, right, within a church system. And then you've got the people who followed the preachers, or the people who followed the account creators who were doing the interpretations of the drops. And then you had the people who weren't necessarily religious, who were reading the drops and analyzing, doing the actual work for themselves. And then you had a 5th category of people who were out there deliberately putting out false information to give those drops a bad name.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the psyop there, I mean, when you look at the American Revolution, it was only like 3% of the population in the colonies actually stood up to the British and took up arms, right? So and that's pretty much true of almost any movement. You don't need anything but a very small minority that is concentrated with very devout beliefs. And with that small core of people, you can create a lot of positive momentum. And from that perspective, it was a psyop. It was a psyop, but it was a psyop designed for good. But just because it was a psyop designed for good doesn't mean that it wasn't a psyop. And it doesn't mean that people weren't negatively impacted by it because they fell into a category because they really couldn't think for themselves. So we're over here a little bit. So I think we're over what you guys wanted to go. So I
do like to say that Q was a psyop, psyoping the psyopers. And what you're talking about is everyone coming back to some sort of godliness. I think the long drawn process of this awakening is to bring people back to that unity and goodness, godliness, and
1000%, man. Really. Yeah. It's I think that what you guys are doing here is really cool. I'm really gratified that you have me as number 1 on this list. Really, it's I'm flattered.
And hopefully you come back, because if we didn't have like time constraints, we could go on for another 2 hours.
Well, we talked about doing some stuff. I love doing this stuff. I love talking about it. I could talk about it for hours. And the more I talk about it, the more I investigate, and the more I investigate, the more I talk about it. And, it's like a vicious circle. And I do try to kind of to stay grounded on things that I know that are verifiable, and try not to get into things that are too esoteric. That doesn't mean that I don't pay attention to things that are esoteric, but I typically that's not my wheelhouse, and I'll do pay attention to it, but you're probably not going to get me to talk about it.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
thank
you guys, really.
Your book. No, where can everybody get your book? Is it on Amazon?
You know what? Yeah, it's on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and you look at it, just look up The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible. You do a search for it, it comes right up. It's me. Okay. It's in hardback, it's in softback, it's on Kindle, and I'm actually in the process of doing the verbal recording so I can make it into an audiobook. But the audiobook, the audiobook is not going to be the entire book. It's just going to be the first section of the book, which is it's just the first chapters and then the epilogue. I'm not going to do the audio portion of all the appendices. I'm not going to do that.
So it's more the investigation part of the book that you discussed.
Well, no,
okay.
The investigation is the appendices, the oral arguments, like if you would like the court argument of me making the argument in court, like that, the verbal part.
Yeah.
That's the first section up until you get into the appendices.
Okay, got it.
Superb. You've got a website as well, Ron, haven't you?
You know what? I have a website. It's untoldhistory.tv, but that takes you straight to my Rumble channel. I need to have a larger web presence with like merch and stuff like that, but I just don't have that right now. I'm you know what? I'm very, very poor at self-promotion. That's not my strength. I don't like asking for money. I don't like pushing products. And you know, and very much to my detriment, right? You know, so but yeah, I don't do well with that kind of stuff. I feel dirty doing that. But
well, listen, we all have to make a living because we all have rent and we all have, you know, commitments. So I think to have some kind of, you know, where you're monetizing, I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, that's not the reason that drives us or makes us want to do it, but we have bills, right?
That's why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I feel like the one way that I can do it is I could do this, and then I'm providing people something that's tangible, and then and then I can make money doing that. Now I'm not getting rich, but my objective here is to wake people up and to get people. You know what? That's the wrong phraseology. It's not to wake people up. It's to get people to think. My intention and the things that I try to do on my channel is I try to generate curiosity, because I don't think we live in a society where there's enough curiosity. I think people are fed information and nobody takes the time to investigate its veracity.
Yeah, good point.
Brilliant.
So on that note, I know Elisa's like, I gotta go.
It's just some clients banging on the door, are they?
Yeah.
I have clients. Yeah, I'm so sorry. But thank you so much, and we will have you on again. Because there's so much to talk about.
Anytime you want. I love to talk about this kind of stuff. This is, you know, obviously I can talk about just about anything. I'm not relegated to just one topic. So
we certainly like to do a bit of Q chat, don't we?
Yeah. So, but I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, guys.
All right. See you soon. Bye. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you. Cheers. See you later. Bye.